So that's great. So already, I can't believe we're only just after 11:30. There's so much more to come. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Wei Yang. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aaron, for the very brief introduction. So give me some space to introduce myself. Good morning. It's my great pleasure to join you here, and thank you very much for the Education Trust invitation. I was trained as an architect and urban designer, and in order to fight with highway engineers, I qualified as a highway engineer as well. And I always describe myself as a town planner. Last year, I was president of the Royal Town Planning Institute. But when people ask me, what do you do? I found it's a very difficult question to answer. So I always try to keep it simple. I say I'm a town planner specialized on garden cities. And then I got very mixed response from people asking these questions. Number one, people say, oh, you're a town planner. Which council do you work? And then the oldest answer I got once was from a staff member from our train station, my local train station, because I saw him so often, and he became very friendly to me. And one day he asked me, what do you do? I said, I'm a town planner. And his response was, I'm so sorry for you. I was very, very shocked, because I think planning is, being a town planner, I think I couldn't think of any other profession suits me better. And also I also want to be a landscape architect. It's still my dream. I hope one day I can be a member of the Landscape Institute. And also, people have very mixed response to garden cities. So I think actually where all this misunderstanding come from. And this year, I eventually got the answer. I went to watch a play called Street Line Crazy. It's played in London this year. I'm not sure how many of you have watched this. I watched this on my birthday as a birthday treat for myself on a Wednesday afternoon. And then I was surprised because I thought about town planning. Sounds maybe people think it's quite boring. But actually the room was like today, full of audience. So I was very surprised. People are very interested into our cities and the towns. And then the show was about two key characters. One is the New York City's park commissioner, Robert Mosey. And then the other one is Jane Jacobs. So it was very much about Robert. He's a very bullying character. Number one, he's not a town planner. So he's an administrator and also half politician. His line is, I really have to draw every single highway as a straight line. There's no curve or no consideration about the local community or local landscape character. I just like straight lines. So the show is very good, called Street Line Crazy. And then Jane Jacobs, she's representing her community, very much fight against this very ruthless urban planning. She believed that was the urban planning being carried out at the time. And then I think she was very right on what she was fighting for. And then she wrote the very famous book, The Death and the Life of Great American Cities. I think actually there was a fundamental mistake in her book. She was very much fighting for the foundation of the planning, the planning practice principle. And she thought the garden city movement was the fundamental mistake why town planning was so wrong at the time. But actually, I bet she never read the book from Ebenezer Howard, Tomorrow, A Peaceful Path to Real Reform. Because in Ebenezer Howard's book, all he was talking about is exactly what Jane Jacobs was fighting for. He was talking about human nature, public health, environment, the beauty of nature, the connection between town and country. He called the marriage of town and country. He talked about social capital, talked about charity, talked about local accessible jobs, workable neighborhoods, locally produced food, and social capital. So all these things are the things we want to create in a new place and in new communities. So I think maybe if Jane Jacobs, she read the book, and she would really have drawn a different conclusion. And because her book was so influential, still now today, so when I specialize on garden city and focus on creating 21st century garden cities. People have this wrong perception of what garden city is about. So my first task today is really give you an idea what garden city is really about. Garden city movement is the foundation of the modern town and country planning. The spirit, I think it's the spirit of planning as well. I always quote this sentence. This is in Ebenezer Howard's biography. He's talking about, he said, the reason he invented the garden city movement was he said, I realized one day, as never before, the splendid possibilities of a new civilization based on service to the community and not on self-interest. At the time was the dominant motive. So he determined to take such a part as I could, however small it might be, in helping to bring a new civilization into being. So that's the fundamental reason he invented the garden city movement. So the essence of garden cities is not really about precisely the physical form, because, for example, the Letchworth Garden City, the shape and form is how it relates to its context and relates the need at the time. It's very much the essence of a garden city. It's a social community. It's an economic model. So Ebenezer Howard, he was talking about how we can marriage the best part from towns, the job opportunities and the education opportunities, all the welfares from towns, to marry with the beautiful countryside and the food production and the fresh air we can have, nice environment. So we can have a combination of both in our garden city. And the essential part is a social community and an economic model. Because he was talking about how about we create a city belongs to everyone living in that city. So in garden cities, apart from your private property, the land and all the commercial properties, parks, will be owned jointly by the whole community. So equally, because when a new town started, the land value will be very small. But when the city grows and you have customers and incomes, all this income generated from these commercial properties can really become surplus in the community and feed back to the need of the community. For example, Letchworth Garden City was built in 1903. It's the first garden city in the world, and I believe it's the most truly followed garden city. Now, each year, the Letchworth Garden City Heritage Trust, they generate £7 million surplus from the properties they own. So this £7 million surplus, they are all being used to the local community based on their need. So during the pandemic, although we had a difficult time, but actually the local communities and the people in need were supported the most through the surplus from the garden cities. And also, garden cities quite often being classified as places for wealthy middle-class people. But actually, at the time, because it was before the planning profession was started, or before planning became law. So Ebenezer Howard, he had the vision of social cities. He thought garden cities are not one single city. It's like a cluster of these communities. And he was imagining the whole country, the whole England or UK, will be designed as clusters of garden cities. So if we can imagine, if now all our cities are designed in garden city principles, then we won't have this such deprived neighborhood, and we will have everybody living in this beautiful environment. So we have to look garden cities in its entirety. It's very much the principles of the garden cities are land value capture, community governance, and long-term stewardship. In Letchworth, there are over 100 different types of charities. So any hobbies or anything you want to support or you want to like, there is always a charity or club you can join. So it's such a beautiful, diverse place for people to enjoy. After 120 years, it's not a black and white picture. It's a very colorful, vivid picture. Because the success of the garden city movement, and then at the time, such a need to really enhance the people's public health and the public's health and well-being. So the town planning as a profession started. But interestingly, actually, planning profession was never meant to be a profession. The founder of the Town Planning Institute, now the Royal Town Planning Institute, Thomas Adams, he was the estate manager of Letchworth Garden City. He set up the Town Planning Institute was in order to form a group of environmental specialists with a social interest. So he was imagining anybody has this speciality on different built environment expertise should join the institute. It's a forum for all environmental specialists with a focus on social issues. So I believe all of you, as long as you believe we should have an equal society, you are all part of the planning profession. So I think it's a definition of a wider planning profession. It's not only a chartered, say, membership can classify what planning profession is about. So today I will talk a lot about planning profession. What I meant by planning profession includes all of you. It's about all the professionals in the built and natural environment profession. And quite interestingly, at the time, there were lots of professional joined up thinking. Thomas Adams, he was the first president of the RTPI in 1914, and he became the 5th president of the Landscape Institute. And the Landscape Institute's first president, Thomas Mawson, he was the 10th president of the RTPI. And also, I think almost half of the president in the RTPI in the first 60 years, they were either president of the Landscape Institute or president of the RBA and also RCS. So at the time, it was a very mixed profession, very much focused on the social agenda of how we can make our city a much fairer place, a more enjoyable place for everyone in the society. So I think from the Garden City movement, I drew the conclusion, the foundation of the planning profession, number one, I think is compassion. It's really we need to understand what are the needs of people, especially the most vulnerable people in our society. The health of the healthy physical and the moral environment is the key to the success of our community. We quite often think about the physical part, but we rarely talk about the moral part, the moral health, the moral healthy society we need. The physical part and the moral part are equally important. And also, I think it's also the profession is fundamentally is selflessness. It's like what Ebenezer Howard said. And also, we really need to think about, we need to create a community. So I'm willing to contribute to my society. And equally, everybody, their contribution will benefit myself. So this selfless mode is so important in a fair society. And also, I think the planning profession is so creative. We have such a creative room of designers, landscape architects, ecologists today. But also, creativity is like what Howard did. It's also about the mechanism. Sometimes we think creativity is only about design, but it's really design the system. The way of thinking is also part of creativity, which I think we need to think about more in the future. Now we face so many different challenges. There is no need for me to read all these challenges one by one. But whenever you turn up the news, you will always see something is really pressing happen. And then we need a joined-up approach to tackle all these problems together. So I believe, actually, we should really think about why our professional bodies were started. And I believe the professional boundaries are merging. What joins us together is our shared sense of ownership, which we can work together. Although we have different expertise, but we can all contribute to a universal common good. The urban population is growing very fast. So it's called the 21st century is an urban century. But the population will grow to almost 10 billion people by the middle of this century. 70% of the people will live in urban areas. But we shouldn't forget there are other 30%, almost 3 billion people plus, live in rural areas. So the balance of urban and rural is so important about our future prosperity, about our whole ecosystem. The climate and the biodiversity emergencies, they are two sides of the same coin. Scientists, they suggest we should treat climate, biodiversity, and the human society as coupled systems, That's the only way we can tackle this problem in a holistic way. But the problem now is, when I attended COP26, I had a strong sensation. These issues are being tackled on a sector-by-sector basis. We have industry strategies, we have building strategies, we have energy strategies, we have transport strategies, but we never thought about the built and natural environment is a place-based approach. We need a whole systems approach to tackle all these problems in a holistic way. For example, no matter how green our vehicle could be, if, say, our development is located in a wrong place, I already have to drive, and no matter whether it's electric car or not, it's still wasting energy. So we really have to think about how we can tackle all these issues through a holistic approach. And our built environment, how we plan it, how we build it, and how we retrofit our living environment is a question we need new answers for. Over the last century, although the town planning profession, the modern town planning profession, started over 100 years ago, but now the challenges we face are much more severe than challenges more than 100 years ago. I think one of the reasons was because quite often urbanization or development are being implemented purely for profit-making purpose, and the housing delivery are being seen as a real estate development. Housing delivery, infrastructure delivery are being implemented in a very segregated way. And one of the reasons we face such a big challenge was because the best practice was never applied constantly in longer term. We have very short-term focused policies or politicians or clients. They just want to achieve something quick, but they forget actually things need to be matured longer. It's a longer-term perspective. The strategic approach, the holistic approach is very much missing at the moment. So we must do something about it to think how we can tackle all these issues in a different way and how we can promote the best practice. Because health and well-being was the very much reason why the planning profession started. From the pandemic, I think we can tell spatial inequality is a direct reflection of social and economic inequality, and vice versa. So our built environment play a key role to tackle these public health and social inequality issues, and how we can do that. One of the biggest challenges we face now is the loss of future. Although the technology changed the fabric of our world, but it has not changed the structure of it. But because there are so many things happening at the same time, especially the different technologies, we feel seems more directly connected. But on the other hand, more than half of the people in the world, they feel they are so lonely. So really how we can bring this community spirit back to our cities and towns and villages is a key answer. It's a key question we need answer for as well. More people looking for a more simple life, and people realize how important it is to connect with nature. So before, it's such a big question we need answers. So I think normally the most complicated question, the answer is simple. We need to understand what is our priority. The number one question is, for whom do we plan? I believe we plan for people, we plan for nature, and we plan for the future of our society. If you look at this diagram, it shows the demographic change from 1980s to the mid of this century. As you can see, we are towards a very fast aging community. In the UK, by 2050, a third of the population will be over 60 years old. Around the world, there will be a fifth of the population will be over 60 years old. So who will look after all the elderly? I'm sure the social care system at the moment is already under huge stress. Would the state be able to afford that? So that's why I think the garden community, the garden city model is such an important model. So we can generate income to support the community to the people needed the most. And also, I think it's a very obvious seen from this diagram. You can see it's very obvious. Half of the population, we have women. And also, if you count the elderly and the children and other disabled and disadvantaged groups, we have over 70% of our population are women, children, the elderly, disabled, and disadvantaged. But as a woman, I often feel the cities are not designed for a woman. It's designed for some very fit young men, maybe teenagers, as you said. So should their priority be our first, number one priority to consider what these 70% people want? We all know connecting or go to nature will help our mental health and our physical health. But there is a lot of evidence to suggest actually our children have become disconnected from nature. This diagram, this map on the right shows, it's a study from Sheffield University. It shows in 4 generations' time, children have lost their ability or their right to move around. The great-grandfather is the big bubble, George. When he was 8, he was allowed to walk 6 miles to go fishing for himself. And then the tiny little dot is his great-grandson, Ed. He's only allowed to walk 300 yards to the end of his street to play. So our cities do not encourage children to play, and parents don't feel safe. According to a study, at least 74% of the children in the UK, they play less than 1 hour per day outside. But the UN's regulation for prisoners is to have at least 1 hour play outside each day. So actually our children, they are being imprisoned by our home, our built environment. So if they do not have the ability or the right to connect with nature, how on earth they will understand nature and they will love nature when they grow up? There's a study interviewed 1,000 children in England, and then 83% of them couldn't recognize what a bumblebee looks like. I know we have a professor today is specialized on bumblebees, so I'll be very keen to hear your thoughts about how we can make sure actually children can understand all these important species surrounding us. So I think the fundamental problem is our professions and our way of thinking are so siloed. This diagram, I didn't expect you to read every single word. So this diagram produced by the Royal Academy of Engineering, it shows the current system map for housing planning and infrastructure delivery in the UK. I think you can see that it's very clearly characterized by conflicting interests and lacking a shared vision. So everybody talk within their own circle, with their own priorities, say, oh, we must focus on this, and we must focus on that, and then somebody say, we must to make more money. So actually all of these, people just talking within circles, but we can never achieve anything. That's why we have such a slow housing delivery, and we have the 25 environment plan, but it's so ambitious, and how we can achieve that. So all these things require us to have a shared vision. But currently, the professionals in the built environment are so developed in silos. We have so many different professional bodies looking after their own entity. At the very, very beginning was architects. That's a very broad definition of architects. They do everything. And then we have civil engineers, landscape designers, and we have structural engineers, town planners, service engineers. So this diagram was produced by Faro Review in 2013. So it was a very sad sentence in the report was said. They said the 21st century is a century of project managers. So it's very much about how we can control our budget and how we can make sure actually we do not overspend and how we can make sure we can make a profit for our client. And then as designers, as planners, we don't really have much say because we really have to convince how we can save some more money and we are not spending more money. So I think there is a fundamental change needed in the built and natural environment profession. It's really how we can create this shared vision. We all have our professional responsibilities, but I think the biggest responsibility is about the future of our society. The value of purpose of planning, again, I mean planning is our wider planning profession, is about people their health and well-being and happiness. So for whatever we do, we really think about that. Actually, although we talk about ecology, you talk about rewilding, but actually we are still very selfishly thinking, because its number one priority is really how we can survive. Because without the wildlife, without the ecosystem, we human beings just cannot survive. So it's still very much about the people. But as UN Habitat pointed out, in many cities, urban planning has been instrumentalized by property developers and other economic and political stakeholders. In places where you need the most professional planners, actually like India or Nigeria, they have the least professional planners to support the growth, the very fast growth. So there was a big issue about the global capacity as well. I believe to tackle all these global problems, we need global collaborations and cross-disciplinary collaborations as well. And also we need new skills and a new way of thinking to think about how we can do things in a very different way. It's reconciled with the IPCC, I'm very pleased to say. This year they published a new report, Climate Change 2022. The number one thing they identified need to change is spatial planning, need the largest systematic change as a key climate change adaptation option. I think this need to be really announced everywhere. Spatial planning is so important because it's the practice to join all the built and natural environment professional activities together. It's the glue to do that. And also, we do need to enhance the ability of spatial planning and have a reimagined spatial planning. So I think actually, after what I said in the last 20 minutes, it's really about, I said, what's the foundation of the planning profession? And what is the current status of the planning profession? So I think we need a revival of spirit to think about what we need in our planning profession and what is the fundamental objective. So I believe the fundamental objective of the planning profession is to create a balanced system for people, nature, and society to coexist in harmony. I think only by creating this system can we survive as human beings. We need to make better connections between plan making and place making, because quite often lots of other good principles are being written on word format, but if they are not applied to real place with the right scale and with good maintenance and long-term strategy, good words, they never mean anything. We really have to make this crucial connection between plan making and place making. And also, there is an urgent need to create a shared vision for the long-term benefit of our society and our future generations in a more complex 21st century context. So we need to get the principles right. I think the number one principle is we need to reconnect with nature. I always, because we have a word, because we say, we describe nature as our mother. We say Mother Nature. I think when we think about spatially, when we think about the planning profession and how we think about nature, we should think about the nature as our birth mother. So if we can imagine the soils are the muscles and the skins of our Mother Earth, and the rivers and streams are the blood vessels of her, and our cities and towns, they are part of the organs of her. So actually, everything is an interconnected, integrated, holistic system. So in that way, we could really think cities and towns in a very different way, rather than think them as concrete-built machines. They should be part of the organic structure of our Mother Earth. So we need to start from nature-based solutions to provide resilience and bring the beauty of nature into our communities. Secondly, we need to consider what our communities need. We need to build community-focused social economic infrastructure. And then we create connections. We use different methodologies or different scaled open public space, public realm, to bring this multifunctional and human-scaled, beautiful, and safe public realm for everyone. I think technology, of course, is very important, but sometimes we are too technology or technique-focused on infrastructure and other technologies. We always should think about nature first, what people need first, and then we need to think about what are the technologies we can use to fulfill the need of nature and the people. I think that's the right priority to consider how we should engage with technology. By having this approach, we could really transform the way of how we think and how we plan and build our towns and cities. And ultimately, we want to achieve a happy place for everyone, so they feel a sense of ownership and fulfillment in the community itself. So in the last 10 years, I've been doing quite a lot in China to talk about how we can have an urban-rural integrated approach and how we can integrate plan-making and the play-making process. So 4 years ago, when China started their national spatial planning reform, I was very pleased. 2 years ago, they took my advice and talk about a totally different approach of consider nature. Number one, they talk about need to have a strategic and long-term urban-rural integrated approach to consider the whole territory as one ecological entity. And also, there are also other things to think about, bring the beauty of nature into our cities and how to have different scaled public realm to connect this. So I'm very pleased to see the change, but of course, it's only a starting point. The details are so important. But I think this is something should be happen, and should be happen quick enough around the world. I think the number one priority for within our profession is we need a modernized planning profession. Because no matter how much we say how important we are, if we do not have the right skills to deliver the things we want to achieve, we can never do that. So I think a modernized planning profession should have global vision. We really have to think about our local issues from a global perspective. And we need to have the interdisciplinary skills and digital skills to make sure we have the right skill and to work with all the different disciplines and to deliver what we want to achieve. And we need trust from the community. And also we need to have leadership to be able to demonstrate and to make things happen. And also we need fundamentally professional integrity to make sure we protect public interest from the bottom of our heart. But although I say a modernized planning profession is needed, but I think the number one thing is really how we can have more skills and we can bring that into our education system, and also how we can upskill the current workforce of everybody working in the profession already. If you think about the 4 industrial revolutions, the first 3 was very much about new technologies to enhance the productivity. But now we are in the 4th and on the step of 5th industrial revolution. This is about our cyber and the physical systems. It's about networks. It's about understanding the user's need. For example, I think we all have this advertise popped up on our mobile phone. Maybe I did some shopping. I was looking for a clothes the other day, and then they will suggest you some other things maybe you would be interested. It's based on your habit. So this could happen in a commercial world to benefit corporate, but we have never used that in the planning sense to understand what our users need and how we can use this technology to understand how we can design spaces based on their behavior, based on their need. So we could have more tailored public realm, tailored environment to suit individuals' need. I think that's something we should think about as well. And also, on a bigger picture, the Council for Science and Technology wrote to the Prime Minister in 2020 to talk about we need a whole systems approach to achieve the net zero. And also, we quite often talk about a circular economy. But circular economy is not only about physical materials, it's also about the information being held by different people, how we can effectively use the information there. So I think we need a reimagining of the spatial planning in the digital era to think about how we can establish a digitally enabled place-based approach to tackle the grand challenges and create sustainable communities. I think that's a very urgent task need to be carried out. In 2020, the government published a planning white paper. They talk about need to digitize the planning system. But we don't need to digitize the current planning system. We need a transformative approach to think about how we can digitalize the whole methodology, the different way of working and thinking in planning and in our built environment. So last year, I set up a digital task force for planning with Professor Michael Betty, with other 8 specialists in this area. We very much focus on a big question about what should be done now to make our world a better place for our future generations through achieving a universal common good. We didn't have any client, so we took a very open approach, and we didn't have any funding because we think it's such an urgent thing need to be carried out to really refresh or revolt everybody's idea to think about how we can do things differently and to break the professional barriers. So we took this 1-year comprehensive consultation, and we published our report in February this year. We want to promote an integrated, people-centric approach enabled to planning, to spatial planning, enabled by digital technology. Through our conversation, as I said earlier, we found actually people have very different perception of what planning is about. So number 1 chapter we described was what planning is really about. The planning is both art and science. It's an applied science discipline. It's not a bureaucratic exercise. It's an applied science discipline which interconnects social, environmental, and behavioral science. And it focuses on recreating a balanced system so that people, nature, and society are able to coexist in harmony. And it includes both the urban and the rural area, and as well as the marine areas as well. And achieve these aims by defining the use of land, protecting the environment, engaging in design, and stimulating social and economic activities. I think this is what planning is about. And I believe all of you are part of this exercise. We carried out some interesting survey with local planning authorities and planning schools. And there were some astonishing findings. We found out, say, for example, every planning application, we have environmental impact assessment, and we have design access statement. So we normally do have quite comprehensive ecological or environmental studies for every single application. But more than 50% of the councils, this information submitted through the planning application are not being used in the local plan making process because quite lots of the information are locked within a PDF. It's only used for that single application. All these valuable data are not being shared. And also, there are lots of silos within the same council. We all think planning is about health and well-being, but the data about health and well-being, about the recreational use, the recreational facilities, how they are being used, all these data are not shared with the planning department, so only kept secretly within a separate department. And also in our planning schools, I keep saying planning relates behavioral science. We really have to understand the people's behavior because our clients ultimately is the general public. But none of the planning schools teach behavioral science in their education. And then because the curriculum is so packed, they don't have any additional rooms to include new skills like digital education. So let's really talk about if we want to modernize the planning profession, we have to start from education. But if the education is not incorporating this, how we can facilitate the change? So I really have to think about how we can do that in a much more effective way. And also, I think the technology, as I said earlier, the fourth and the fifth industrial revolution, will help us to create a system. Because planning is related to so many different things. It's beyond one single person's ability to consider all these big issues together. So if we could be enabled by data, big data and digital technology, we could have a much more evidence-based decision-making process. Because at the moment, the decision-making process is very subjective. So we created this new methodology of a digitally enabled systems approach to spatial planning. This is a cyclic system developed by two interconnected loops. One is based on a decision-making loop, based on a democratic and transparent process. Another one is an evidence analytics loop, empowered by data and digital technology. At the moment, our planning system is a linear system. So we have a proposal, and then we go to the public to say, what do you think about it? We have this public consultation. And then we go through the approval process, and we build something. But we never understand how these things are performing, how we can do better in the next time. So it's essential for us to create this loop, this monitoring and feedback loop, so we can learn better in the future. And also, crucially, quite often, we engage public at a very late stage when the proposal is fully developed. We need to engage them from day one by asking, what do you want? What are the requirements needed in the community? And another issue is we quite often use historic data in planning. We need to think about the future because the climate change, demographic change are changing the future of our context. We need to understand this context to build into our consultation so we can create a shared vision based on evidence and the future. So when we are in a consultation or place-making stage, we can develop our proposals based on real evidence. And this could really speed up the approval process and also have a much more integrated implementation and management regime. And from that, if we could build into the BIM and also digital twins technology, we can capture all these essential data, understand what are the real users' data and how they use the space. We can create a feedback loop to know actually how we can improve the environment to make it better in the future. So it's so important for us to understand how we can improve in the future, which at the moment doesn't exist. So we talk about we need to establish a digitally enabled planning profession. First of all, we need to learn from other professions, the medical profession. I always describe planners as doctors of our towns and cities. For planning profession, they have research much more closely related to practice. You have some new scientific findings, and then that could really apply into medical practice very, very fast. But we don't have that in planning. So we need to create an ecosystem for the research, practice, and education, much more better interconnected. And also our education can be transformed on different pathways. We could have specialists focus on urban analytics, have more GIS-based town planning, and more design thinking. Urban designers, landscape architects, they all bring into the planning profession to have a much interconnected education system. So we understand each other. Somebody have a much broader understanding, some have much in-depth understanding. So this could really help to reshape the depth and the skills of the whole built and natural environment profession. So the task force was formed 18 months ago. So we had we have website access from 96 countries, and our report was downloaded by 5,700 times. So we're in a very interesting journey. So we think actually now the next step is to formalize the task force, and we want to focus on the development part of R&D. For the task force to be a convener, facilitator, and an enabler of digitalization in mainstream planning practice and education. So we could build an evidence-based planning and engaging the public in a much more effective way. I think to summarize what I said today, we really need a reinventing the planning profession, creating a reimagined planning profession, a profession that can coordinate the best knowledge and advance the most appropriate tools, technologies, and skills from related disciplines, so that we can achieve the shared vision to create a harmonious community for people and for nature. During the pandemic, I wrote a book about garden cities, about 21st century garden cities, because when I saw how the vulnerable communities were so badly affected by the pandemic, I just felt it shouldn't really happen at the first place if we could have our cities and towns built based on the Garden City principles. So I visited Letchworth Garden City during the pandemic in September when the lockdown was finished. And I saw children was playing in this beautiful garden. So I felt, actually, if you remember Howard's word, he said, I want to take my small part to bring a new civilization in the world. If Howard's small part created the Garden City movement worldwide, what would stop us to making some change for our future generations? So I would really urge you to do something together. And if not us, who will do it? If not now, when we should do it? Thank you very much.